We have changes coming up, and as anyone who's ever driven a car, there are the fast ways, there are the bad ways. When I drive from our house in the village to our new location on the other side of Novi Sad, there's multiple ways to get there, you see. And I've tried several of them. Some of them are fast, going down Boulevard Oslobodzenia. That's the quickest to me. But Google Maps says to go down these back roads, where there are many of the, kako se kaže srpskom, the bumps. Puto, well, the man-made speed bumps. What do you call those in Serbian? Leženici?
Line policemen, we call them.
Line policemen. Okay. Lying flat policemen. Yes. There are many of those, and they try to slow me down, but they don't work. There's many ways to get to a destination, but sometimes you don't get to the right destination. Sometimes the way is hard, sometimes the way is easier. As we look towards our future, we have to decide which way do we want to get to the end, and which end do we want to get to, you see. And that can be a battle for me. It can be a struggle for us. One of the things that causes bumps in the road is religion, is tradition. Now, I am for tradition. Jesus said that true religion is what? Talks about the fatherless and the widows. Right? To take care of these, this is true religion. So Jesus wasn't afraid of religion, but he was not for the wrong kind of religion. He talked about pure religion and undefiled before God is to visit the fatherless and the widows. So when it comes to these things, how do we go forward? In my life, I got so, how do you say? I probably shouldn't say. So unhappy with we call protocols, or there's another word for it. What's it? Will you say someone? My wife. What's the word for like a church has its way it does things? We can't go beyond that. It's not a protocol. Stacy, you probably know. No? What is it? Ritual. Yeah, it's more of a. I can't think of it. It'll come to me in a moment. But it says, hey, this is our approach. I'm still trying to learn English, so it's okay. So I have to ask my wife the English word for it. But we have a list of rules, and we can't go beyond those rules. Okay, we've set a precedent, is another word, all right? We have to be careful going forward. What is biblical? What is tradition? And not only that, but we also are living in a country where it's very much the same. You don't do that. And I will tell you the story of this morning. When I came in and I start to turn on the YouTube to prepare for the live stream, to find a lovely comment on our YouTube channel. One man said that I am a fool and a crazy person, and it's people like me that will not stop at killing people because I am a fanatic. So that was intense to get very first in the morning. So I encourage you, don't look at YouTube before church, okay? No, so I tried to explain to him that it's not my intention to be, and it was on a video that I made about the kids and teaching the kids the Bible. But in a culture like we are, people are afraid to read the Bible. And reading the Bible makes you a fanatic. Think about that. It used to be normal. But you can be classified a fanatic or a crazy person just by reading the Bible. That's crazy to me. But that's what's coming out of the woodwork, as they say. So we're going to read a story here about David and how David got himself into a very dangerous situation. sometimes there are these stories about if there's a train traveling down the tracks and there's 3 women on this track and 1 man on this track, or whatever they say, the ages, which track would you put the train down? You'd have to sacrifice somebody. You ever heard these crazy ideas? There's no good answer. They're just trying to see your preference. But you think about if there was mankind, let's just say 1 human on 1 track, and then the world's largest church had been moved to the other track, and God had to change the train. Would he choose religion, or would he choose man? Now, for you know the obvious idea. Yes, that's true. But for a lot of the world, maybe they're confused by this. We're going to see a story here where God chose man. All right? It's a bold question. Most people maybe have never even asked this question. But many believers assume that God prefers clean buildings, quiet atmospheres, and polished routines. Now, most of you have been coming to this church for quite a while, and you have very quickly realized it's not very polished and professional, okay? This is my fault. So, but when a hurting person walks in, how are they met today? And how are they going to be met in the future? And I'll give you some examples of where I'm going with this thought. When we traveled America, me and my wife, we went to many different types of Baptist churches. All right? They all had different styles, different ideas. Some were very modern. Some were very old school. Some were very classical. You know, very up class, you could say. We walk into one church, and they have what it seems to be like almost gold-colored tiles on the floor, and very high ceilings, very fancy. I have my children with us, and we begin to walk into the auditorium. And one man stops my wife and says, "Excuse me, you can't bring him in here." And it was our youngest child. And she said, "Okay, you take him." No, she didn't say that. But what do? This church had gotten very classy. Well, I still believe they're a good church today, and I'm not necessarily judging them, but we have to decide, you have to decide, how you're going to act and how you're going to treat truth versus religion. Now, you may be confused right now. It's all going to make sense soon. There's other stories I could tell you about a church that I went to, and I used to do prison ministry. I used to go into prisons and talk to inmates. And there would be some who would have a serious conversion with God. And I said, "Man, when you get out, you need to find you a church. Get plugged in," as they would say, like a plug in an outlet for the light to come on. Get somewhere. And so many times these men will leave, and they will go to a church, but they're only met with a sideways eye or caution. And I understand why, but if that man goes to church for a year or two and he's always kept at an arm's distance, you think about that person, never accepted. Why? Because of tradition or religion or fear. You know, these stories happen all over the place. Maybe a man who was a known sodomite, I'll use that word today, he starts coming to church and people begin to keep their distance. If we're not careful, we can adapt to that kind of culture. We can become some kind of religious organization and not a hospital. You understand, a church, God designed a church not to be a religious organization, but a hospital for the needy. I could go on for stories after stories. Even coming to Europe, many churches like this began to start. A missionary will come and People will begin to assemble, and all of a sudden, they get a heart for the needy in the area. So they go to the Roma villages. They go to the gypsy camps, and they give out Bibles and tracts, and they play games with the kids. Well, you know what happens? Those kids begin to fall in love with the people of that church, the few who go and help. And then those kids begin to come to church. And those kids bring their parents to church. And the church begins to grow. But then the people that are in church, they begin to see how many Sigan, they might call them, or Roma or Gypsy are coming to church. And so the regular people no longer come. And then the Roma people no longer come because they don't feel like they're accepted. This happens in Europe all the time, right? And I've even been given some counsel when I came to Serbia. They told me, be careful how you do that. They said it may be better to start 2 different churches. And to me, coming from America, that's crazy. Like, you wouldn't even think about having a white people church and a black people church, right? I mean, we would never even think about that where I'm from. But in Europe, in most cases, that's what they recommend because of the statistics of what happens. People want comfort. They want normal. They want the same language, right? But if you go back and you see how Jesus Christ organized his church, and you see the churches that came after them, they were very complicated. They were very, in a way, unorganized. But they were moving forward. So I'm going to point some things out today. We're going to read our text here, and I'm going to show you some stories. Religion has its place, right? Structure, it does matter. But when the system becomes more important than the soul, it's no longer God's system. And I have a fear that when we get to a place of comfort, maybe it's this new place, we develop a system. And I have a fear that we forget souls and then we just get comfortable in a system. I go to church, I go home. This is my system. I have here also the top 10 countries in the world that export. Before we read our text, I want to talk about exporting and importing. All right? The top 10 countries that export. You can probably guess many of them who they are. They import. That means bring goods into their country. Import. Of course, we have the U.S. That's the most importer of goods. We have China, number 2, Germany, Netherlands, Japan, and so forth. The top 10 exporting countries that give away. And when the imports come in, but the exports are small, they call that a trade imbalance. And they say that's not good. You know, some would say that actually exporting more than you're importing would be even better. You're making money by exporting goods, right? That's the concept. We have to be careful as Christians. When you come to church, many times it's worship. Don't get me wrong. Coming to church is showing God that you care. It's showing God that time in His Word, time with His people is more important than your time. That's a good thing, right? That's a very good thing. But sometimes many people come to church to get. Maybe it's to get spiritual food, which is good. Sometimes it's to get encouragement, which is also good. There's many good things you can get from church. Sometimes people, they see the songs. It's not in your language. And so they think, what good is it for me? But if that's your question, you have to forget who is listening to the songs. And why are we singing the songs? Is it just for us to get? If it's just for us to get, then yes, you're missing it. But we're singing, and it doesn't matter what language we sing in, we're singing to please Him, that He is greater. Amen? So when it comes to our spirit, I want to ask you this question before we move on to David's story. When it comes to importing and exporting, something I try to think about in my life Am I importing spirituality more than I'm exporting? Am I importing goodness, fellowship, more than I'm exporting? And we have to be careful as we move forward that this place does not become a place of import. If all we do is come to church to feed off the Word of God, to feed off each other spiritually, but we never take the time throughout our week, throughout our life, to export. What does that mean? To export grace to others, to export love to others, to export truth. Many people come to be fed by the truth of God. That's an import. How much do we speak to our neighbors? How much do we export? And if you're not careful as an individual, you're going to have a trade imbalance. We call that stingy, where I come from. We call that selfish, when all you do is take, but not give. I know many of you give financially, and that's great, but I'm talking about spiritually. We take in, but what do we give out? Many times, the only time we come to church maybe is once a week. We import, but how much do we export? I want us to think about that. Again, all of this has to do with us moving to this new location and having to think about the future and the danger of becoming comfortable. I could tell you story after story of places in the Bible, of real life situations where people become comfortable and began to lose their walk with the Lord. I think about Israel when they moved into the land. They began to get comfortable. You think about when they came back to Israel and all the gates, all of the houses were burned down and torn down. And they began to build first their own houses. And they made their houses fancy. They were taking care of themselves. And God said this, shame on you for building your fancy houses, but my house is left desolate. What happened with Israel? They began to get happy, complacent. And I just want to throw up a word of warning. As we go and we move, we're going to go see this place after church today. I hope all of you will come with us if you have time. I want you to see the vision of things that we can do. You know, there may be some kind of prison ministry that we start. But the danger of starting a prison ministry is there may be some criminal offenders that come to church. And are you going to be okay with that? We may have some children's outreaches and fellowships. Our last landlord, we told him where we're going, and he said that's not a good location to live. He said that's a dangerous location. But our other person said it's fine, so we don't know who to trust. But as we begin to do children's outreaches there's going to come some kids that are not good kids. And what's going to be our response? You see, no, I'm sorry. We don't want the dirt to affect our flowers. You see, and that's where this message is going. To be careful that we don't hold so hard on religion that we forget the purpose behind it all. Let's look at the story of David here. In 1 Samuel 21, David has begun to be more popular than the King Saul. And King Saul was getting jealous. And so David has to flee from the kingdom. And he's going about with his men, fleeing from his king. There's a village not too far from the kingdom named Nob. I think in Serbian probably be like Nob. I don't know. And this place is the home of many priests, men of God. And David goes there to inquire of them, what does God want for me? He goes there and tells them, I'm hungry. I have need for food. I'm in a bad spot. And he looks over at the table where the holy things are, the things you don't touch. They're illegal to touch as a non-priest. And there's an item there called the showbread. All right. Now, this showbread was only for the Lord. for the priests, for the Lord. You don't touch it. It's illegal. But that David came in and he said, wow, I don't know what to do. I don't know what's going on. And so the priest says, well, can I help you? This is a small story. And David says, I'm hungry. The priest says, yes, take the bread and eat it. Now that should not happen. Not only that, but the priest gave David some other things as well. But to eat the showbread? Surely God said no to that. Surely God was disappointed in that action. Now we'll come to find out a few weeks later, maybe a week later, David, or the king, Saul, found out that this one priest named Ahimelech, he helped David. And the king was very angry. And he said, because you helped my enemy, you're going to die. He's going to have, and so he had his soldiers approach to kill the priest. And the soldiers said, I can't do it. They said, I can't kill God's man. So David looked at another friend of his and says, you do it. So he killed this priest that gave David the showbread. But not only that, he ordered him to go to that village and kill all the priests. 58, or no, 45, something like that, 45 priests or 50 priests, correct me if I'm wrong, were killed that day because of what these priests did. It wasn't the bread that the king was angry about. It was the fact that the priest helped his enemies. And then after they killed the priest, they went and killed all the families of the whole village. He killed them all because he was so angry with David. Yeah, he killed them all. How sad is that? So I'm not concerned so much with that story, but with that showbread. What did God think about that? Furthermore, I ask you this question: what did Jesus think about that? And we find that story in the book of Mark. So if you'll turn with me to the book of Mark, I want to read this to you. Mark chapter 2. Mark chapter 2 and verse 23. Jesus is talking to the Jews, to the religious, and the story goes in verse 23 that it came to pass that as Jesus and his friends, his disciples, went through the cornfields on the Sabbath day, which is a holy day. And in religion, you do not break the holy day. You don't do it. You don't eat the showbread. You don't disrespect religion. But here we're going to find a story that where Jesus Christ puts mankind above religion. He puts mankind above religion. And he even goes and uses this story of David to prove his point. And so the story goes this, that as they went on the Sabbath day and they were going and plucking food, which is considered work. All right, you should have prepared before the Sabbath day, but you were lazy, they could say. And so you have to work on the Saturday. Shame on you. And the Pharisees said unto Jesus, behold, why do you on the Sabbath day do things that are illegal, not lawful? And then Jesus responded to the religious people and said, have you never read what David did when he had need and was hungry, and they that were with him, how they went into the house of God in the days of Abiathar the high priest, and did eat the showbread, which was not legal to eat, but only for the priests, and gave also to them which were with him. David ate and shared it with his men. This is illegal, the priest said then. And then Jesus used that to show, listen, you guys have been so concerned with religion that you forgot about people. So concerned with religious traditions, religious ideas, that you forgot about people. Now watch this. Jesus, he turns unto them and he says this, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. What's more important, can I ask you, the Sabbath day or mankind? Jesus says mankind is made better than the Sabbath. God gave us the Sabbath, a day of rest, so we can have a day of rest, not to make some religious system out of it. The same thing with the showbread. Now, some man comes to the back. One day he sits in the back and he's got he's been in a rough life. He smells like marijuana. He's got those what they call those gauge earrings, tattoos on his face, dreadlocks, perhaps. And he sits in the back. He's come in here. Someone sits back behind him, maybe one of our deacons. And he whispers over to the man and says, "Excuse me, I don't think this place is for you." It happens. It happens far too often. A young lady comes in. She's had no father. Her mother hasn't cared about her. She's dressed. She's acted just like the rest of her friends. She's worldly. She looks worldly. She has no desire for God until that day. She says, "I want to go to church and I want to hear this Bible taught." So she walks in. And she walks in, maybe she doesn't look dressed appropriate, like what some might think. And she sits in the back. And someone says to her, "Excuse me, I think you're in the wrong place." You see, if we're not careful, we can grow to a place where we become comfortable, we become stiff, we have our religion, we have our seat, we have the songs that we like, we want things done properly and perfect, till we get to a place that is void of the Spirit, void of what God's desire is. And it's a very real danger, and it happens to churches all over the world. And if we don't talk about it today, we could be in danger of going through it as well. So, I want to share a few thoughts here. We'll talk about this story about the Sabbath. We find that Jesus and his disciples, again, were going through this Sabbath day, and Jesus responds to these religious people about the showbread. Later on in Mark chapter 3, we find Jesus goes into a synagogue and heals a man, when? On the Sabbath day. Strike two. We find different stories of Jesus doing miracles and doing good deeds on the Sabbath day. But the religious people of his day said, "No, you can't do this. This is not good. This is not the way it's supposed to be." We may, as our church, we may not observe the Sabbath like the Jews did, but we still can fall into the same thinking when we elevate systems above souls. We expect order. We want children to sit still. We don't want distractions, right? We get easily annoyed by translation systems, right? We have these annoyances that we don't like. It's not normal, it's uncomfortable. Well, what we're really wanting, we're wanting a nice religious system. That's really down at the heart of it. We just want a nice religious system that I can get used to. We expect order. We expect predictability. We want structure. And when something is messy, when it's loud, or it's different, we feel like we've lost church, right? We've lost church. This doesn't feel like church. You ever ask yourself, what do you want? You ever ask yourself, what do you want? Do you want church? Or are you looking for a place to grow, to help others, to grow together, right? So what that kids throw airplanes back and forth at each other in front of the church? Probably shouldn't happen, right? But it's messy. We'll learn. We'll grow, right? You can throw it at me. I'll catch it. Go ahead. Was you? Yeah, I didn't catch it. It's messy. Life is messy. But I would prefer a messy, godly life than a clean, perfect life that's void of the Spirit, that's void of growth. We could tell people not to come here, but this is the best place I think people can learn. Yes, we could ship them off into a different class in a different place, but I think this is the best for people around this world. Someone could say something like this: I can't feel the Spirit in this service. There's too many distractions. There's too much translation stuff. It's hard to worship when it's not my own language. But they reveal a preference for comfort over compassion. Jesus never rebuked a messy room, but he did rebuke hard hearts. He did rebuke hard hearts. We want church to feel familiar, safe, and under control. But the early church was chaotic. It was multilingual, full of cultural clashes, and filled with the Spirit. Our worship can't embrace a bit of holy discomfort if it can't. Maybe we've traded mission for maintenance. If your worship can't handle diversity, if your worship can't handle differences, then maybe your worship is not ready for heaven. A church with 3 languages, noisy kids, non-traditional guests may not feel like the temple, but it does feel a lot like the Bible. The early church had Jews, it had Gentiles, it had widows, it had beggars, it had Roman soldiers. People from every walk of life gathered under one name, Jesus. The name of Jesus is more important than our religions, more important than our pasts, more important than our languages. And the fact that we can come together under one name shows the world what the most important thing is. It's a testimony of God's grace. So, what are we going to take away from this lesson today? When David was hungry, God gave him bread. When the disciples were weary, God defeated and defended them for having rest on the Saturday. When the man with the withered hand, Jesus didn't wait until Monday. He healed him today. Even when religion pushed back, religion today tells us, don't read your Bible. Crazy enough. But it's a blessing that we don't follow religion. So if God had to choose between religion and mankind, of course you know the answer to that. But some people get confused. God will choose mankind every time. And he did. By coming and dying on the cross for us, he put mankind over all things. Now, there's a spot that also in the Old Testament, I believe it talks about, Hebrews chapter 13, where it says this, that be careful how you treat people. Because some people have entertained angels unaware. Think about that. Angels unaware. And I'm as guilty as anyone as having my order, and I don't want to get out of my structure, get out of my comfort zone. But man, I'm trying to always self-evaluate my spiritual situation. Europe, do you call it nation of Europe, country of Europe? What do you call the Europe thing? The union, all right? I looked it up to see if the Europe as a whole was more of an exporter or an importer. I don't know if I found the right answer or not. But that's not the best question, because it's up to the individual countries that make the results for Europe. If Germany is doing a poor job, if Switzerland is doing a poor job, if Lithuania is doing a poor job, I'm probably going to mention a country that's not in the European Union, but if England, okay, there we go. Okay, you see what I'm saying? If each of these countries are not pulling their own weight, then the union as a whole is on a negative. Do you understand? Why does that matter to us? Because I want to bring it back home to you. Every one of you is your own nation, your own country. If all you're doing is importing, if all you're doing is having religion, but no grace, no love, no export, and the majority of us are doing the same, then what is our church? We are a representative of you. When the world talks about the European Union, they're actually talking about individual countries who are doing either a good job or a bad job. Think about us today and your decisions, your path. It affects all of us. And we need to be careful as we go into this next stage of our life, what that's going to look like. Are we going to be concerned with comfort, what makes us happy? Or are we going to sit and pray and ask God, what makes you happy? How can you use me? What do you want from me? We're going to give a conclusion here. To God, people matter more than preferences. If God had to choose between religion and mankind, what would he choose? You see, he left heaven. He came to earth. He set aside the rituals of angels to dwell with the broken. And when religion tried to crucify him, he rose again. So, imagine a rescue team arriving at a collapsed building. Survivors are trapped under the rubble, calling out for help. But the team hesitates, not because they don't care, but because protocol, because they haven't got the call from the chief. They wait. They put the system over common sense. It happens in businesses. All I have to do is turn off that button. Well, you can't because we have to have protocol. If we're not careful, churches develop protocol as well. People walk buried under guilt, under addiction, loss, fear, crying out for help. And instead of rescue, they get religion. Novi Sad does not need more religion. For us to keep to ourselves, to build some kind of big church unit that does nothing but import love to ourselves, import good messages, import lovely music, but we do no exporting. What benefit are we? If we're not exporting the truth of God, if we're not exporting the love of God, the mercy of God, the grace of God, and all we're doing is taking care of our pretty little selves, then what good are we to the world? We're good for ourselves, but we're not good to anybody else. And I hope and I pray that our future will look like an exporting country where we show the love of God, we're the light in our area, where people can see the grace of God, the love of God in us, around us. But that's not it. Of course, we want our church to be a hospital, not just a religion, but a hospital. But how do we go about doing that? How can we do that and please the Lord? It's hard. It's difficult. It causes sacrifice. But are we willing? Are we willing to sacrifice? Now I want to have you stand this evening. If you all stand with me tonight, we'll have a song. We'll be dismissed.